Now I invite Gautham Vishnu and Kuriachan Josey of Department of Law, Central University of Kerala, to present Clouds of Prejudice and Makes the Rainbow Invisible.
Respected dignitaries, dear friends, our paper is titled Clouds of Prejudice Make the Rainbow Invisible. And it particularly deals with hate crimes against LGBTQIA plus community. Leo Tolstoy has said that love is the only way to rescue humanity from all ills. Yes, love is the only way to rescue humanity from all ill. But it is hate that is against this notion. Hate crimes is a crime against love. It's a crime against humanity. Now, I'll be dealing with the history of hate crimes. Aristotle has said that man is by nature a social animal. And man being a social animal has interacted with other human beings. And in the course of that interaction, when we look at the history of humans, wealth was concentrated among certain individuals. And due to the concentration of wealth and status among certain individuals, it led to the creation of classes. And this class division led to the hatred, and which in turn led to hate crimes. We can see the classic examples of hate crimes when we look at the history of humankind. For example, the Crusades, which happened in the year 1000, 1200, and the American Civil War. Also, the Nazi persecution of Jews. Simply put, we can say that hate crime is a crime which is motivated and intentionally conducted owing to prejudice and animosity. But there are other instances of hate crimes also. When we look at our day-to-day life, we can see certain hate crimes which are normalized. And hate crime, particularly against LGBTQ plus community, is one among such hate crimes which is normalized in our day-to-day life. When we move on to the global scenario of hate crime against LGBTQIA plus community, the term hate crime or bias crime was first coined in US during the year 1980s. But still, we don't have a uniform understanding or definition for hate crime. Some of us may think that hate crimes against this particular community is happening only in underdeveloped or developing countries. But that is not the case. LGBTQIA plus communities are targeted in even developing countries, in developed countries like US and UK. A recent study shows that sexual orientation is the third highest reason for hate crimes. The transphobic and queerphobic attitude of people also pave way for the increase in these crimes. Racism is another factor which complements hate crime. For example, a white trans person is facing less hate crimes than a black trans person. So that is the global scenario. Now, when we move on to the Indian scenario, we can see instances of hate crimes even before the independence of India. Because of the social fabric, which is based on caste system, that definitely aids the hate crime in India. Later, during the partition in 1947, around 2 million innocent lives were lost due to this hatred. But the real fact is that in ancient India, when we look at the paintings and sculptures, take the sculptures of Khajuraho, for example, there are instances where these sculptures are depicting homosexuality. And hence we can conclude that in ancient India, people who belong to this particular community were having an equal footing. But during the colonialization and particularly after the colonialization, homosexuality was criminalized in India. And hence the hate crimes against LGBTQIA plus communities increased. Now I'll move on to certain instances of hate crimes in India. In 2013, a former foreign and finance minister, he called for the arrest and punishment for partners of gay US diplomats. That was a very controversial statement, which even led to a rift between India and US. In 2020, a trans activist was shot dead in Delhi. In the same year, a gay man was killed by two men he met in a dating app. In 2021, an elderly trans woman was raped and killed by a young man. Very recently, in 2022, last week, we saw an incident where a trans woman complained against a circle inspector for humiliating and assaulting her in Kerala, in Kozhikode district. So this shows that hate crimes are increasing in our society day by day. Now, what is the role of society in aiding hate crimes, particularly in India? We know that educational institutions are considered as the second home of every child. But rather than instilling moral values on the students, the incidents of bullying and humiliation are thriving in schools. And teachers who are having an orthodox mentality are aiding such instances. When we look at the role of media in aiding the increase of hate crimes, we can see that media is always after exclusive news. There is no follow-up regarding the news which are having less value. So in such instances, media is also aiding the increase of hate crimes. When we move on to the role of police, as I have told earlier, there are even instances where police officials are assaulting and humiliating trans persons because of their gender identity. Another institution is National Crime Records Bureau. Very recently, Crime Records Bureau has stopped recording hate crimes by saying that they are not able to differentiate between a normal crime and a hate crime. Another agency is the government itself. A classic example for this is that India abstained from the resolution that mandated the appointment of an independent expert to monitor the protection of LGBTQIA plus community in the UNHRC. So all these acts of the government shows that government is turning a blind eye towards trans persons. Now, what is a legal perspective? The idea of protection of transgender, or the idea of protection of transgender, was discussed in the case of NAS Foundation versus Government of NCT of Delhi. In this particular case, yes, in the case of NAS Foundation versus Government of NCT of Delhi, Delhi Court held that Section 377 of Indian Penal Code was unconstitutional and it was decriminalized. But later in 2013, in the case of Suresh Kumar Kaushal versus NAS Foundation, it was again recriminalized. But later, in Shakti Vahini versus Union of India, court again recognized the right of an individual to choose his sexual partner. And later, in the very famous Navdeep Singh Johar versus Union of India, the section 377 of IPC was again decriminalized. Now we have a Transgender Protection Act 2019, which provides for the protection of transgenders. And through this act, persons who are assaulting or humiliating a transgender can be punished for up to 2 years of life imprisonment. Now, what is the way forward? A major issue which is faced by LGBTQIA plus community is the recognition of the society. For this, marriage equality is an essential concept. the sexual identity of a person, because of the sexual identity of a person should not be excluded from the society. For that, marriage equality of homosexual marriages should be implemented. Also, public should be given proper awareness about the rights of LGBTQIA plus community. Even though there are legislations, even though there are acts, even though there are statutes, it will not work properly if the society is not accepting the people who are belonging to LGBTQIA plus community. Also, proper training to the authorities concerned should also be implemented. As I have told earlier, there are instances where police officials are themselves humiliating transgender persons. There should be proper training to police officers. Another thing we can do is that we can improve legislation and its implementation. Even though there is a legislation, that is the Transgender Protection Act, it's a very narrow legislation. It deals with a very narrow concept, but the rights of LGBTQIA plus community as a whole should be protected through a legislation, and its proper implementation should also be done. Also, there should be a good moral education system which can instill the idea of humanity and love among children. And finally, legal literacy should be provided to the members of LGBTQIA plus community. I would like to conclude by quoting Martin Luther King Jr. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, but only love can do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Kuriachan and Gautham.